I'll call this meeting to order. We'll call this meeting to order for the executive committee meeting. Item number 2 is vote on approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That motion passes. Item number 3 is a vote on the approval of the meeting minutes. Is there any discussion? I think it was part of the packet that Tracy sent out.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Let the record show that Mayor County has joined us. Item number 4 is report and vote on the election of calendar year 2022 officers.
May I go back to the minutes? I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go back. I just looked at it again. I know I moved approval, but it showed me as absent from the last month's meeting, but I think I actually ran the meeting last month.
Yeah,
You did run the meeting last
Yeah,
month.
you did. We'll fix that, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
I was somewhere sunny. Bob. All right. Do we have to reopen it, Scott, or can we just make that change?
I think you can just make the change.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Perfect. Item number 4 is report and vote on the election of calendar year 2022 officers. Todd, you're going to give us an update, and then Mayor Anderwig, maybe.
Yeah, I'll kick it off, and Bob can jump in if he wants to. But the committee met, given the changes in the makeup of the executive committee, we had 2 positions really that were opening up, the treasurer and the vice chair. So the nominated slate is for Mayor Anderwig to be moved to chair, Councilperson Riva to vice chair, and Councilperson Weaver to secretary treasurer to fill the various offices for the executive committee. We'd make that recommendation for approval. I'm happy to answer any questions. Bob can jump in as well.
Second.
Bob, no need to comment. I appreciate you serving though and taking charge of this. You were putting into kind of a different situation, but Mayor, I appreciate it. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Item number 5 is report and vote on fiscal year 2022-2025 Transportation Improvement Program amendments. Aspen, which I'm not sure if I met Aspen, so welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, so DART has 5 amendments to the 2022-2025 TIP. And so I have a different slide for each of them. And so they're just moving the funds from one year to a different one. So the first amendment is the radio system replacement project. Next slide. The second is computer hardware. Next slide. Then computer software. Next. And miscellaneous equipment. And I think there's one more. Rideshare vehicles replacement and expiration. And so all of these need to be an amendment just because, again, they're moving the funds from one TIP year to the next. And so if anyone has any questions, happy to take them or forward them to DART, but otherwise I recommend these amendments for approval.
Excellent. Any questions for Aspen? All right, it is a voting item. Any discussion?
Move to approve, Ankeny.
Second, West Des Moines.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Item number 6, report on fiscal year 2022 second quarter budget report from Dylan.
Thank you. We've got a budget report in the agenda packet that gets us through halfway through the year. So this is through December. The spreadsheet of all the costs and everything is included on page 9 of the agenda packet. There's really nothing that's out of the ordinary through this. Everything is kind of what we expected it to be as we go throughout the year here. If there's any questions anybody has, or have to take that. We did share this with the finance subcommittee yesterday. They didn't see anything of note on this either. At the bottom of that page is a item on grant pass-through funds. And the big one there is the Translo project. So as we've been talking to you and Zach's been updating you on each month, we've been drawing down that funding. And I think we're to the point now where we've almost asked for reimbursement for all of that. So that'll quickly be closed out and zeroed out moving forward. So with that, if there's any questions, have to take it. Otherwise, this is just for your just for information.
Any questions? So Todd, I have one question. You and we didn't have a chance to talk about this. So you were asking for an additional staff member.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the next item. But
Okay. All right. Is there any other questions for Todd? All right, we'll move on to item number 7 is a report on fiscal year 2023 Unified Planning Work Program and Budget Development. Dylan?
Thank you. I know some of you are doing budget discussions this morning, so we'll keep with that theme and talk about budget here too. So if you go to the next slide, just as we've talked to you before, we need to develop our work program, which includes the budget for the next year. We'll come back next month with a draft, which will include both the budget as well as the work program elements for you to review and approve to send on to the Iowa DOT, Federal Highway and Federal Transit for their review. They'll get us comments back, we'll update that, and then we'll come back in May with the final so that we can have everything submitted by the June 1st deadline. And then like I said, our budget will take place starting July 1st. If you go to the next slide, a couple updates on more of the planning work elements of this. I think I commented on this last time that Federal Highway and Federal Transit have come out with emphasis areas for this year. So as we go through and develop the actual work products, the planning elements, we'll make sure that we are showing how we're going to address these. And then if you go to the next slide, we've been soliciting projects from our member governments and so forth. And then there's some that we know as staff that we're going to have to do. Those are listed up here. These are kind of outside the norm of, develop the tip and do Stbg funds and that kind of thing. So our passenger transportation plan, that's a once every 5-year thing. That's going to come due next year. We're working on the what's called now the Interconnect Plan. This is the update to the bicycle pedestrian plan that we developed many years ago. Along with that is a sidewalk inventory and gap analysis to understand where we have sidewalks, where we don't have sidewalks, especially around transit and some other critical services like that. Looking at parking and possibly looking at parking regulations and see if there's uniformity that we can get to on that. Implementing new programs. So we have our Stbg funds that we've been doing, but there's additional programs that are coming out now because of the recent transportation bill. So we'll just monitor that. That's a program that we'll have in there. Maintaining the data bike and taking that a little bit further, looking at forecasting with that data, not just telling you what is there today, but actually forecasting, kind of like we do with the roadway pavement system. And then, as we've talked about in recent months, we've recently become a member of ICLEI, and that comes with some tools to allow us to look at greenhouse gas inventories, helping cities with that as they work through their climate plans and so forth. So we're still soliciting projects, and there's still time to get those in there. But these are a few of the projects that we've received so far, or that we've developed so far. I think now we'll move on to the budget side of things and give you an update of where we are. And wanted to first talk about some changes to contracting and staffing, as Joe just kind of alluded to kind of set the stage for then what you'll see in the budget figures we'll talk about. So late last year, as you're aware, there was a new transportation bill passed. And with that bill came a pretty sizable increase in funding for MPOs for their operations. So this is separate from the Stbg funds that we use for infrastructure. This is for MPO operations. The preliminary dollars that we've received, or the numbers we've heard from the Iowa DOT, is that we'll see an increase of about $215,000 over what we're getting this year. So that's about a 24% increase in funds over what we get now. And then in the subsequent years, that'll be about a 2% increase moving forward. So that's a pretty, significant increase of dollars for us that we'll need to figure out how to program that in there. One question that came up yesterday in the finance committee is whether we have dues to match those funds and to draw those down. And the answer is yes, we do receive enough dues that we won't have a problem matching that. But that's just one thing to note. The other thing is, as we've talked in the past, we've been working through the MIPA project and getting that organization set up. And as we've shared with you, MIPA will be hiring its own planner. That planner will be housed at the MPO office, though, is kind of the intent and the idea behind that. We still need to develop the contracts and so forth. So MIPA will have its own staff person, it'll pay for it. But that staff person will be housed at the MPO. The contract would say the MPO staff, Todd has oversight, and we'll talk about that contract later in the MIPA EDD update item. And then any additional planning services they might need would be a contract with the MPO too. So that's a new contract that will be coming to the MPO that we haven't had before. If you go to the next slide, another update in contracts is with the housing trust funds. So for the last couple of years, we've been administering housing trust funds for the Central Iowa Housing Trust Fund and the Story County Housing Trust Fund. Both of those, or at least the Story County one and a few other counties, are asking for additional support and are bringing dollars to that. We're still working through this, but they're bringing additional funds that might be enough to sustain a housing planner. So again, this would be a planner that's not funded through the DOT or through the MPO dues, but funded through these contracts. So we're still working through that, but that's something to keep in mind. So then if you go to the next slide, just to bring this all together and what it means for staffing, we've got the MIPA employee, which again is paid for solely by MIPA. So no DOT funds, no MBO member funds. We've got the housing planner potentially, again, no MPO assessments, no DOT funds, paid for solely through contracts and grants. And then the additional staff person that would be funded through MPO funds and DOT funds would be the addition of a finance person. A finance position would something that has been recommended by the finance subcommittee for the last year or two, just as we've gotten more complex with our funding and some of the findings we find in the audit. We just haven't had the resources to do that. But with that additional funding that we're going to receive from the US DOT, we would have the ability to hire that person now and sustain that going forward. So that is one position that we, in addition to the two contract ones that we would, that we are looking at and have put into the budget figures that you'll see here. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or comments before we continue on showing you some of the budget figures.
Dylan, I got a quick question. This is Tom. The additional funding through the US DOT, you said $200 and some thousand annually. I assume there's probably rules tied to that. What can be clearly for what you're proposing, it would cover administrative overhead, staffing costs if we chose to. Can it be used for other things if we chose to?
It can be used for anything that's planning related. So it can be used for the oversight, operations of the MPO. We could use it for consultant fees, things like that. It can't be used for infrastructure. So that's a separate, that's what the Stbg funds are for.
Okay.
But
okay.
it could be for operations.
Okay, good. Thank you. And then that's not one-time money. That's going to be coming back every year annually, right?
Right.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dylan? So real quick, Dylan, what additional grants are we looking at? I know we've had the transload. I know we had water trails. Going forward, I believe with the additional water trails projects, I don't believe they have any interest of running that through the MPO. So what additional grants are we looking at, and for what?
So I don't think there'd be any additional grants that the MPO would be seeking. The only other ones would be contracts with other organizations, such as last month you approved one with Marion County to help them with the zoning code update. Things like that would be other funding that we're still working through and figuring out what might be there for next fiscal year. But I don't think there'd be any other federal grants or anything like that the MPO would be seeking.
So, but we need another finance position to handle some of those out of the realm type, that's not going towards our fee that we're paying, but where other communities are coming in and asking us to do other things, we need to actually hire a finance position for part of that. Is that what you guys are asking?
Yeah, yes. And, we're still going to have the water trails grant for the next at least 3 to 4 years, going through the construction and the closeout. Those other contracts we have with member governments for various planning services, or any number of things could come up, but it's been a hole that we've had for a number of years. The audit continues to recommend having some additional resources. The finance subcommittees recommended us having this the last couple of years. They recommended again this year, agreed with the idea of having this position back at the MPO. It's more to make sure we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing.
Sure. And this is a full-time staff member, or are we looking
Yes.
at somebody part-time with, or this full-time with benefits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Todd or Joe, can I ask Todd a quick question?
Yeah.
So I don't want to belabor this, but I know there's some folks here that were here back then. Bob Andewig would be one. Before you got here, right before you got here, Todd, there was an issue
Right.
with budgeting and funding, and it was pretty dicey. We had to maneuver our way through it. We called a
Yep.
special committee together. You probably remember that story. But so we did some stuff proactively after that so that didn't happen again. But I don't believe we didn't put an additional staff person on to do finance at that time, did we?
No, we did not. There wasn't a desire to do it at the time. And we divided those activities up among Dylan, myself, Zach, Tracy, and but finance isn't, really our background. We can get through it. But as more things come on and more requirements from the feds come on, it just seems that to cover the MPO, it would be good to have someone with some real background in this area. And
I'm supportive of it. I don't want to get in that position we got in way back then. That wasn't pleasant.
no,
Yep,
it wasn't.
Tom, absolutely. I was on the meeting yesterday for the finance committee, and we discussed at length on this. And again, this has been a hole, I think, and I will remember where we were back then. I agree with you.
Yeah.
We don't want to get back in a situation like that again. An organization of this size and of all the complexities that we have needs to have a dedicated finance person.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's a hole that we've had, and I think any of our member governments all have staffs of finance folks. So this is a hole that I think needs to be filled, and I think it's the right thing to do.
Good.
Hey, Todd, Ruth here. Just to be clear, all of these positions are basically funded. You have the extra operational funds, but also should you contract services with a community, that revenue comes in, and you could base it on the extra staff person as well.
Yeah,
Could accommodate the extra staff person in that as well, correct?
correct.
Yeah, and we'll show when we get into the budget in the next couple of slides. But one thing to note is for the grants that the contracts that we have with these other organizations, we do charge them a nominal 5% fee just to get something out of it and cover the additional admin that goes along with that. That totals almost $20,000, and that would help pay for this position as well, in addition to the additional federal funds that we are going to receive.
Perfect. You answered my question. Thank you.
So if we want to go to the next couple of slides real quick, we'll show you a couple of numbers. And these are, again, draft. These are still subject to change as we work through some things. But if you go to the next slide, we'll show you, so these are revenues. So our revenues largely come from the US DOT, our assessments, and then our contracts. And we show SERPA contract and other contracts, but really SERPA is just another example of the contracts that we've had. We've just had SERPA for a long time. So one thing to note with that under the US DOT funds, the Federal Transit Administration dollars, that's actually about 50,000 short than where we think it's going to be. Iowa DOT said we should hold back on that one. The reason being is that even though that the additional dollars have been authorized through the transportation bill, they haven't been appropriated yet. We'll talk about this in the legislative update, but there's an appropriations bill that still needs to happen. We're still in a continuing resolution. So long story short, we've held back on that one per Iowa DOT's advice. So our federal funds should be about 50,000 higher than what you're seeing here. Once, hopefully, by the time we get to this, to the final version of this, we'll have all that programmed in there. And then you've got the non-DOT funds. So that includes our assessments, all the contracts that we're talking about. So we're about a little over $2 million, $2,088,000 for revenues that we're going to see, or that we think we're going to see. If you go to the next slide, we'll look at a different, so one thing we have to put in there is the STBG and the build grant for the water trails program. These don't really affect the MPO's operating budget, but because they will show up as revenue coming into the MPO and then revenue going back out to the MPO, if we don't put them in our budget, it kind of screws up the audit. So the recommendation from the finance subcommittee a year or two ago was just to put these in there, kind of show them as a special pass-through dollar, and then again, they don't really impact our funding at all. So just to show you that that's in there, so we are covered when it comes audit time. Here's the revenue that we see for water trails and then the match for that. Then if you go to the next slide, we look at expenses. Our expenses are largely just our personnel costs, so salary, wages, fringe, and then our indirect costs, our general expenses for non-personnel things. There are some special direct costs, what we call other direct costs. These are things like consultant fees, our audits, any special software that we're buying that doesn't really impact the whole organization. It might be for one dedicated program. So those are all in there. So you can see at the end of the day, the difference between revenue and expenditures is about $55,000 in the positive. And again, that's without programming all that federal funding yet. So we're hopefully by the end of the day, we'll be about $100,000 positive. So one question we'll have to figure out as we go through this too is what, if anything, do we do with that additional revenue that could be spent on, you know, we started purchasing trail counters and replacing all those throughout the system, so we could purchase more of those. We could do other special studies. You know, there are a number of things we could do, and we probably need to wait until we hear from all the member communities of what kind of projects they want, and then take a look at that. But for right now, this is where we're sitting, so we're in a pretty good position going forward. I think there was maybe one more slide that just kind of talks about our indirect costs. No, I'm sorry, that's not in there. Just wanted to note too that we've talked about the MIPA and the Housing Trust Fund and how those would be paid for through special contracts. If we were to remove those and just look at what the core DOT funded, MPO assessment funded hours are being used towards, this is what that looks like. So you can still see 90% of our dollars are being used for MPO activities, and then just a small amount is being used for all those other contracts. So I think that's what I have for you. If there's any questions, please let me know. We'll continue to work on this, but next month we'll come back with a full work program that'll have all the budget figures as well as all the work program planning elements in there for you to review before we submit it to the Iowa DOT.
Dylan, appreciate it. Anyone have any comments or questions? Excellent. We'll move on to item number 8 is report on fiscal year 2026 STBG set aside tap out applications. Zach and Aspen are going to tackle this together, right, Todd?
Yes, they
Yeah,
are.
I'll kick it off and talk about STBG and then turn it over to Aspen to talk a little bit about TAP. Just wanted to give you a brief update on where we're at with the STBG and TAP applications for federal fiscal year 2026 funding. Applications were due back on January 7th. We received 5 applications under the system capacity category, 5 under major reconstruction replacement, 3 bridge projects, and then 1 each for system optimization and for transit. In total, a little over $28.3 million has been requested. We haven't got our final number from the DOT yet. We'll get that probably at the end of February as far as a target for what we have this year, this cycle. But I'm anticipating that we'll probably be looking at somewhere around 13 million like we have in past years. So not nearly enough to fund all the requests. Next slide, please. In your agenda packet was a list of the projects broken out by the various different categories that I mentioned. On the screen before you here is a table that lists all the projects that were submitted. I won't go into any detail on these, but you can see them there in your agenda packet. And if you have any questions about them, I'd be happy to take them. Next slide. Aspen, I'll turn this over to you.
Thanks, Zach. We received 4 TAP applications, which again, the STBG set aside and TAP are the same thing, just a name change. And all 4 projects that were submitted were trail or shared use TAP projects. And typically we have about $1.2 million of TAP funds. And so, but our final request number was 3.5. So again, our funding subcommittee will have to make some decisions later in March. The next slide shows what those projects are. So we had submissions from the city of Des Moines, city of West Des Moines, Polk County, and Ankeny. Next slide.
Thanks, Aspen. So the timeline moving forward, we have the presentations for the applicants scheduled on February 24th. That'll be before the funding subcommittee. It'll give the subcommittee an opportunity to ask the applicants any questions about their individual projects. We will be scheduling a follow-up meeting in probably sometime in mid-March. We're going to start working on getting a date scheduled for that. That's when the funding subcommittee will make their recommendation, and then the recommendation will be presented to our tech exec and policy committees in April, and then brought back in May for final approval. And I think that's all I have for slides on STBG. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Zach, thank you. Any questions for Zach? All right, we'll move on to item number 9 is report on the Purple Heart Highway. And Bob, I'll probably let you take over after this. We got to get back up to our meeting.
All right, sounds good.
Real
Thank
quick
you.
on this, I'm sorry, Joe. Real quick on this, the DOT continues meeting with stakeholders. We're working to schedule some meetings with some of the remaining communities along the corridor. Then the DOT will generate a report based on all their stakeholder meetings. Also had a short conversation with the Greater Des Moines Partnership on how do we approach this legislatively. We'll continue those discussions and bring that back to you probably next month. That's all I have unless you have questions.
Any questions?
This is Russ Trimble.
Hey.
I appreciate all the work that everybody's doing on this. This is an extremely important project for all of us for economic development. I just can't help but wonder if this is just spinning our wheels, though, because I just don't ever see how we address the issue with the farmers and how we get them comfortable on this. I know we are trying to address that, but
Yeah.
gosh, I just hope this happens, but I'm very, very doubtful.
It's a complex process, that's for sure, Russ. We've got a couple options that we've been working with the ag community and the DOT on how to do some dynamic signing for having slow moving vehicles on the interstate. There's precedent in other states for having slow moving and overweight vehicles on an interstate. It takes some lift at the congressional level to do some of that. But there's opportunities to make this happen.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, Russ, just the biggest lift, I believe, is the weight restriction. We want to work with the farmers in the ag community to be able to share this road and as it's designed. And so, it's a heavy lift, but we really want to work with them, not eliminate them off of this road. And that's been our message from the very beginning. And if our message is any different and we decide to do anything different, you're right, it'll never happen.
Yeah, well, I'm very hopeful this happens. I think this would be just such a great thing, and hopefully we can all celebrate someday.
Yeah.
Hey, Joe, or maybe Todd, and we don't need to do this today, but Todd, could you get me system back? I mean, I remember, and this has been going on, as you know, for a long time, this redesignation, long before I left the MPO and long before I came back. But, it seemed like to me that there was a significant cost to signage changes as well as grade changes that need to be made. And we had a lot of discussion about the whole issue with the farmers, and I get it all. I remember all the promises that were allegedly made before the bypass was even built. But I'm curious as to where those numbers stand right now as far as total cost, signage, if grade changes have to be made and things like that. Just curious about it. So we don't have to do it today, but just sometime if we get a chance to visit about it.
Real quick, the signage is going to be probably in the $1.5 million number cost. The grade separation issues have largely gone away because they've changed their design standards, so that those costs aren't there any longer. And those were 25 million or so. So
yeah. Okay, good. All right, thanks.
Mhm. That's all I have, Bob.
Okay. So you're done. So we'll move on then to the water trails update.
Yep. And that's me again. as you know, we sent the water trails, the Scott Avenue, Birdland Park, our Birdland Marina, Prospect Park, and Harriet Street Park package out to bid last fall. We didn't get any bidders on the December letting, and then talked with various contractors on what was the reason for that. They had a lot of questions on some of the processes in the bid package. A lot of it focused on the Scott Avenue Dam mitigation project and how that was being asked to be designed. So the design team went back and relooked at a lot of things, also changed some of the schedule and materials that were going to be requested, to kind of broaden those scopes up on materials, and changed how constructing the Scott Avenue Dam modifications were being asked to be done. A lot of the dewatering plan was modified, which reduced costs significantly. So they put a new bid package together that was turned into the DOT earlier this month. It's up on the DOT's website. We're also doing a special letting, so pulling it out of the DOT's regular schedule, so it's a standalone letting. So contractors can really focus in on that date and not have to be putting in bids on other DOT projects. So that bid letting, as you can see on the screen, will be on March 29th. We'll have a pre-bid meeting next week on the 16th with the contractors that are interested in seeing what we've changed and ask any questions they may want to ask. And then we'll go from there and see what we get on March 29th. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Any questions, Todd, on this? All right. Move on then to item 11, which is the Economic Development District update. Gunnar?
Well, Todd shared this news with you, I believe just last week or the week before, but we are officially an Economic Development District in mid-Iowa. We received notice from the Assistant Secretary on January 26th. And that was closely followed by an invitation to join the partnership program. And I'm going to jump back and say, this puts us right at the threshold of phase 4 launch and operations. So as you've been following along, we've been through quite a lot to get to this point. We're very happy to be here. But as I was saying, we did get the invitation to join the partnership program. This was the expected grant program that we've been talking about, where it's a $70,000 annual match for having more capacity, basically staffing. It's a 3-year grant award for $210,000. And so we're working on that application right now. I take that back. We submitted it on February 7th. It included details about our region, our match commitment, staffing plan, and scope of work. I will mention that the membership enrollment continues to go very well. I won't read those for you, but I believe that totals 79. And I know there are several more jurisdictions looking to potentially join here in the next few days. And I will note there's at least one jurisdiction that had a vote on the agenda last night, but I haven't verified how that turned out. Just haven't heard back yet. So Dylan mentioned the contract, and we're looking to hopefully bring this back to you for approval next month. But we wanted to start outlining it for you today. As we've said previously, MIP will be hiring a senior planner and then also contract with the MPO for the balance of its needs as an organization, mainly administrative support, but also some planning support. So the high level outline of the contract is that it is going to provide for managing all administrative functions. So it names Todd as supervisor, including hiring, firing responsibilities. It also handles human resources, accounting, auditing, et cetera. And then also provides planning support for MIPA as well. So annual costs on that, about $60,000 that the MIPA would pay to the MPO. I won't go into this too deep here, but you see how that breaks down between indirect costs, planning support, the audit, and admin support. I'll note the hiring process for hiring the senior planner. We're going to post the opening this month and hope to have first round interviews either later this month or early in March. And then we're putting together interview committee with MIPA board members in early March, and then we hope to be able to make an offer and have them start by April 1. Last but not least, I want to do a brief update in the American Rescue Plan. In the end, 4 jurisdictions submitted applications for EDA grants, all under the travel and tourism one. We also helped, there's a couple others that we assisted to that opted not to go forward with grant applications. But also we'll note that ISU, GMAC, and United Way pursued grant applications using our SEDS. Last piece is that we did get an update from the EDA on the travel and tourism program. I just want to pass this along. They received $90 million in requests and have about $19 million to spend. And they're targeting about 2 awards per state, and there's 10 states in the region. So you can see we can anticipate a couple in Iowa potentially. And from Iowa, we know that there are 7 applications, 4 of which are from this region. And I will say that EDA would like to spend some money in this region because we are new. And we can expect awards to be announced by the end of March. And that's it for me, unless I can answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Gunnar. We're really moving forward. So any questions for Gunnar on this? All right, we'll move on then. To item 12 is the Translo facility update. Zach?
Thank you. I just wanted to give you a quick update on where we're at with the Translo facility. We've got some pretty exciting news today. The railroads have signed off on the project. Ryan Companies has demobilized from the site, so we're wrapping up the project. I talked to Gabe yesterday. They've got a great, he mentioned that they had a great safety record on the project, which he wanted me to pass along. I think they had a total of 55,000 working hours on this project, and they didn't have a single OSHA violation. I'm not even sure they had a single injury on site. So I was very proud of that. They have been spending this week doing a lot of customer meetings. I think you mentioned they had 8 to 10 meetings lined up this week with potential customers to start setting up contracts with them to deliver product through the site. He also mentioned that their first official load is being delivered today. So as of today, the Translo facility is operational, and the first things will be going through it. I believe this one is a load of rebar. So very exciting. And if you go to the next slide, I'll cover those next 2 bullets under that. So since we're at the end, we're kind of at the point where we're looking at what we need to do to close out the build grant and the Rlg funds from the DOT. I think Dylan mentioned that we're close on both of these, and he was correct. Today we spent $10.7 million of the build grant out of 11.2. So we have 1 more reimbursement request, which I'm anticipating that they'll submit probably in the next week or 2. And that'll be for approximately $468,000 in federal funds that are left to reimburse for. Once we've submitted that final reimbursement and it's been approved, we'll be able to do our final quarterly report. We will not have to wait till April to do that report. We can just do it as soon as that last reimbursement goes through. And then once that quarterly report is completed, we'll also be able to complete the final performance report. And once that's done and been approved, the project will be officially closed out. And at that point, on the build grant side, all we'll be having to do is do our annual reporting, which will be just some pretty basic information that we have to submit to the FRA on an annual basis. I think the next slide covers the Rlg funds. We've got approximately, or we submitted a reimbursement request about a week ago for $531,000. This was all the remaining funds in that Rlg program. So I imagine that we'll probably be getting that reimbursement back in the next week or 2 from the Iowa DOT. To close out the Rlg, Iowa DOT will have to come out and do a site visit. So we're working with Des Moines Industrial to get that scheduled so the DOT can come out and do that. And then following that, they'll be able to close out the project and then return or release the retainage to us, which is $170,000. Essentially on each reimbursement request, they held back 10%. So once the project is closed out, they'll cut us a check for the $170,000 and we can forward that on to Des Moines Industrial. But I believe that is all I think maybe I have one more slide for you. Yeah, just the schedule. The warehouse is operational. The track's operational as the first deliveries are coming through today. So we're closing out here in March probably. And then the only real thing left for Des Moines Industrial is to get their formal certificate of occupancy. They got their temporary one, I think maybe a week or two ago, but their formal one has to wait until the landscaping gets completed, and they're gonna have to wait until spring to get that in. So probably in May of 2022, they'll have that formal certificate from the city. Other than that, that's all I have on the project. We're all, I think, very excited to see this happen. You know, we've been working on it for a long time, and I know I appreciate all the work that everybody on the committee's done for this, and we're just we're excited to see this happen. I think I speak for everybody when I say that.
Zach's done a great job managing this project, so appreciate his efforts on this as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another great project. So, all right. Any further questions on that? If not, we'll move on. Then item 13 is legislative update. Dylan.
Thank you. Got federal update. As I kind of mentioned before, we're still waiting some implementation steps from the US DOT and Iowa DOT on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And as I talked about before, we're still under a continuing resolution. That's supposed to go through the end of this week. There was a bill introduced earlier this week to extend that continuing resolution out through early March. So we'll probably be dealing with that for a little bit here. Hopefully, like I said, we'll have all that figured out before our budget takes effect so we can see all of our dollars that should be coming our way. On the state side of things, there's several bills going on. We haven't hit the funnel and everything, so still trying to wade through what all is of interest here. I think at the policy meeting, I talked about the first bill there, that HSB 536, that would eliminate the ability for cities and counties to regulate stormwater. I think I incorrectly said that bill was dead. It wasn't dead, it just was returned to the committee without a vote. So it's still around, just nothing has really happened with it yet. There's a couple other bills. The one that everyone's probably aware of is the SF 2206. That's the bill that would really have some significant changes to the tax programs, kind of eliminating local option sales tax, but raising the state sales tax and then giving a 1% back to the cities and counties. The big thing that would do that is of interest to us, or one of the things that's of interest to us, is the IWIL funding. So that would fund the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Fund. Though it sounds like a lot of the groups that are supportive of that are still waiting to see what's in the fine print before deciding whether they're supportive of this bill or not. There's a lot of bills out there related to automated traffic enforcement. A couple of those bills are still would allow it. It would just put more regulations around the use. And there's a couple bills that just outright ban their use. So I'm sure that'll all get sorted out as the legislature moves forward. And then one other one that caught our eye was the final one there, SSB 3070, which would have some changes for how port authorities could be developed and some of their powers and functions. It would change it so where instead of needing 2 or more local entities to create one, you could do it with 1 or more entities. It says that a port authority wouldn't have to necessarily be along a river or anything like that. It can kind of be anywhere in the state. So it just makes it seems to me, make it a little bit easier to get them up and going, as well as to get them some financing and funding abilities. So not sure the backstory behind it, but could be of interest to this area. With that, that's all I have. But if there's any questions, let me know.
All right, thank you, Dylan. Any questions? All right, then move on to upcoming events, Gunnar.
Real briefly, no slides to share today, but wanted to let you know that there's going to be an orientation for new members of the policy committee or technical committee. That is at 3 o'clock next Thursday, immediately preceding the policy committee meeting at 4 o'clock. So we can send that link out to anyone who's interested. I'm sure that's has been shared with all the policy and tech committee members, but just want to make sure you knew that was coming up.
All right, great. Anything else for the good of the order today? All right, that gets us to the end of the agenda. The next meeting will be March 9. And there's nothing further. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.